Hi, Pastor Matt here, back again for another week of Ask TVC. This past weekend, we talked about the hurdles of women, or really what we said are the two kind of categories that the most frequent sins of women kind of fit in. So if you'll remember back when we were talking about manhood, we talked about the buckets of selfish passivity and selfish aggression. And if you begin to look at how men are prone to sin, it would almost always fall in one of those two categories. Now, they're not neat, but they're there. And so what we did with women this past weekend is said there are two that women struggle with. And so based on, or two categories, two buckets, if you will, in which most of the sins of women can fit. So I say most, not all. And of course, there's overlap here. It's not as neat and clean as just saying, here's what men do and here's what women do, because we're human beings made in the image of God who have a tendency to sin. And all of our sin can be defined in certain ways. So with that said, let me answer some of the questions we got in this week. Ask TVC. I was very surprised to not hear about manipulation or control touched on in the sermon tonight about women's hurdles. Any particular reason? Okay, this is a great question, and honestly, I wrestled a ton with, is control and manipulation a symptom of comparison and perfectionism, or is it another category altogether? And so I think that control and manipulation begins to work itself out, not in and of themselves, but rather because of comparison or because of perfectionism. So if you are comparing yourself to others and you're saying, that's the standard, that's what I want to look like, that's what I want to, then control and manipulation is to get to that end. Or if in perfectionism, you're saying, this is what I must look like, then you will control and you will manipulate in order to get to that standard of perfection. So I saw control and manipulation more as symptoms rather than a bucket in and of themselves. And so that's why I didn't include that as a bucket into itself. And so that hopefully that makes sense to you. The second question is, how can I balance being an iron that sharpens iron without wounding or cutting him down? Okay, so I said yesterday that one of the best ways to approach your husband about concerns you have in his own life, or where you think he can lead better, or where he has punted on his responsibility, really comes back to really tone and timing. And so I used the illustration of October being probably the busiest month of my year. And man, one of the things I just have not done well in October, ironically enough, in a season in which I'm trying to press men to step into that space, is the family devotional life. And so it's been a while since we've done that. And so my sweet bride came to me, and Lauren just said, man, I know it's been a really crazy month. In fact, just watching you run like this, I'm sure you're just exhausted. I'm personally feeling, I think the kids are probably feeling too, a bit disjointed. We knew this month was coming. What can I do to create some space so that we can sit down and pray together and read the Bible together and do a devotional? Can I start dinner earlier? What do we want to do about baths and showers? How do we want to do this? What can I do? And so really what Lauren was doing there, I know her well enough to know that she was respectfully saying, hey, sweetheart, it's time for you to engage our hearts and not just encourage others to engage their families' hearts. And so that was one way that Lauren has approached me with the right tone and at the right time. And really, if I could just flip that over, this is the exact same way that husbands should approach their wives, in the right tone and in the right time. I want us to all strive to be experts in the strengths of our spouses. And so we should know the best things about our spouse, what they do well, and we should verbalize that and write it down and slip it in his note as often as possible. So everything would have gone different that night after the kids had gone to bed if Lauren sat down and just like, hey, why aren't you doing the thing you're telling everybody to do? I mean, here you are standing on stage telling men to have devotionals. You're not even doing one with your family. That's going to incite my flesh. And I think I'm to the place where I wouldn't have snapped or yelled or but I would have really started to struggle in my flesh, wanting to be justified, wanting to be. But Lauren served me well in encouraging me to be what God would have me to be, while not emasculating me in the process. And so that's how I'd try to encourage you. The next one, and this doesn't really have a lot to do with this past week's sermon, but here's a great question. Just wondering if TVC responds publicly to issues like the Houston mayor's subpoena of pastor sermons. I usually don't respond publicly about those kind of things. I think I did mention it as a symptom in the intro of one of the sermons in this series, but didn't really take the time to really kind of dismantle it and try to argue the other direction. And honestly, we give everything we do away for free. You don't have to subpoena anything, all right? Any article, anything we write, anything you can get for free on our website. So I've never really felt the need to try to address those type of issues in any of the venues that we have. I'll oftentimes touch on topics, cultural topics, if you will. I'll just call them biblical topics from the stage, and we'll use what's going on in culture as examples of either where man is getting it right and doesn't know he's lining up with the Bible, or where man's getting it wrong and the Bible's version is more beautiful and lovely than what man is trying to create on his own. And then lastly, and this is going to be a simple answer, you've said multiple times, and I would like for you to provide examples of society crumbling sociologically and economically due to a lack of male headship. Well, let me just encourage you this way. This is a simple answer, and you're going to get so many hits here, it's going to be overwhelming. But if you'll just Google fatherlessness, you're going to see everything from government websites to sociological studies to economic studies that show the impact. Sometimes even like one article I read, even that I think it was written in 2013, so last year, was a scientific study that showed that the brain chemistry of a child is altered when a strong male presence isn't in his life, the biological father isn't in his life, and that children tend to become more aggressive and more angry when a man isn't present, when their biological father isn't present. And so even on this, as we talk about fatherlessness, as we talk about the failure of men to step into what God has designed them to be, I'm always going to say this because I know the sheer amount of single women and widows out there, or single mothers and widows out there, that where the ideal is lacking, grace always abounds. And so if you're hearing even this now and you Google fatherlessness and your heart begins to sink as you see what they're saying about brain chemistry and about behavioral aptitude and intellect and everything that's affected by the lack of strong male presence, just know that where the ideal is lacking, grace abounds. I'm not from a home with a real strong godly male presence. Some of the godliest men I know are not. God has ransomed them, rescued them, pulled them out of the muck and the mire. And so take heart. So if you're interested, man, feel free to Google and research on your own. I could cite articles here for you, but I think you can find them. And then if you're a woman, please hear me. The Lord has not forgotten you. He sees you. As I've often said in this series, I eventually want to preach a sermon on how God hears the prayers of mamas. It's an amazing thing to watch mother after mother plead with God for the soul of their child and see God respond to the prayers of that mother. So that's it for this week. This coming weekend, we will be in Hebrews chapter 12. And although that is not a text that was written specifically for women, it is a text that speaks to really the struggle of comparison and perfectionism and how Jesus enters that space and the gospel saves us from the brokenness, weight, and despair that flows out of those two nasty buckets. So I'll see you this weekend. God bless. Talk to you next week.